And we've already discussed some of those things, but let's discuss it in a bit more detail regarding injuries. Shall we do that? In terms of how sexual attraction.
So we know that if we carry no injury, our sexual attraction is naturally and harmoniously only for our soulmate.
So that's the pure state.
That's the pure state. But the situation on the planet at the moment is that for most of us, we've got injuries around our sexuality. Yep. So when we're healed, it's only for our soulmate.
Now, if we start on that basis that Mary said, that's the basis that we start all of the discussions with. So if we assume for a moment, even though you may not believe that, let's just assume for a moment that this is the pure state. Just assume that that's the pure state. Can you see if that's the pure state, any time when we have felt differently to that must be an impure state or an unloving state.
Or injured. Can we say injured?
Should we call it injured state? Yes. Now, what we need to do firstly is we need to stop condemning ourselves for our injuries. You can't examine your injuries openly while you're condemning yourself for having them, right? Because it's the condemnation of them that causes us to go underneath and go, I don't want to know, I don't want to know, don't talk to me about that, right? That's what causes all of our injuries to go underground, our own judgmental attitude towards them. So what we need to do is say, all right, accept, yes, there's many times in my life when I have not felt this pure state. So that means in those times I was in an injured state. That's our first point that we need to be aware of. If I have not felt this state, then I was automatically in this state. All right? Also, we need to stop condemning our injuries. We need to allow ourselves to see ourselves as we really are. We just had a discussion with Anna. Where is she? Yeah. Remember you were saying, hooray, I can see that I'm so ugly at the moment.
Oh,
whatever.
I
can see that I'm controlling. In other words, we can be happy that we can see the truth about ourselves even when the truth isn't very pleasant.
And why were you happy, Anna?
The epiphany of the puns.
If we use... yeah.
Whoa. the epiphany of the pond scum.
Yeah.
Because you feel joyful that you've heard for so long you're controlling, or you have these injuries, and then when you see it in your heart and you feel it, it's like, oh, I can finally see this, and it feels good,
Yeah,
like I can see all this error, and it's exciting because I can finally see it.
Yeah. Why is it exciting to see the error?
Because then it's like, then I know who I really am, and then I can work from there.
Yeah, you can change when you're just talking about it or thinking about it and not feeling it. How can you change it?
I can't take any action.
It's
from
just
that
a
place.
concept. Yeah.
So the first point was that you know what you are at last, but the second point, which is the more important one, isn't it?
Is I can take.
I can change.
Yeah.
See. You see, while I'm trying to shove any shameful things under the carpet or any past history under the carpet or any of those kind of things, while I'm trying to put it under the carpet, I'm not able to change. I'm condemning myself to not changing. As soon as I can know what I am at last and see myself as I truly am in the mirror, I can now, there's this beauty in it, and that is, I can change. I can get from this point to a different place. I can get from the injured state to the pure state if I want to. And it's all based on my desire. If I want to, I can get from that state to the other. Yeah. Okay.
Anna and I were laughing because I was saying, yes, I know I'm pond scum. I'm lower than low.
It comes from a movie, actually.
Yeah.
But anyway.
That was the pond scum analogy.
Yeah. Not many get it because they probably haven't seen the movie.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the injured state that we may do particular things in. All right? And let's, rather than condemning this injured state, let's start examining what is actually going on in terms of, from an emotional perspective, what is actually happening, a denial of what emotions. Now, what are some of the most taboo sexual practices that you can think of that most people, don't even want to discuss?
I don't know how to spell it.
What's that?
Pedophilia.
Pedophilia? In other words, sex with children or desire for sex with children? Yes.
Sex with animals?
Right. Bestiality? Is it with an A? I don't think it is.
Bad spelling, both.
Yes.
Oh, and behind as well.
And behind too.
Yeah.
Oh, anal sex?
Sorry?
Anal
sex, yes.
Necrophilia?
Necrophilia, which is sex with dead people. Is it?
Yep.
Yeah. I'll write it as that rather than necrophilia. Yep. Diana? Incest, which we've got as paedophilia, yeah?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Or incest, if you like, yeah. Well,
Both.
let's put it in there, yeah?
Sometimes that's adult as well.
What else? Joy, thank you.
Forced sex, like
Rape.
rape, anything that's like bondage, all that sort of stuff.
Oh, okay.
So there's a difference between those two, because
yeah.
one of them is what do they call it? Consensual.
I was going to say,
And the other one
bondage
is not.
can be one or the other as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go for
What does S&M stand for? That's what they call it, isn't it? It's sadism and masochism.
S&M.
Yeah.
Bondage. And that's different to things like rape and abuse, right?
So, swinging.
Swinging.
Yep. That's like where you swap partners.
Swap partners.
Yep.
Partner swapping.
Yep.
How are you all feeling?
Is everyone breathing? I can see this is another beautiful image for the next media expose.
Yeah. Don't think that's what we're promoting.
Yeah. Injured. Yeah.
Prostitution.
Yeah. Groups.
Group
so
sex.
threesomes or more. Yep.
Sex in the name of sacredness.
A tantric sacred sex.
I'm just going to put inverted commas around the sacred there.
Because a lot of it is not very sacred. Yep. Masturbation, yes.
Okay,
So let's
yeah.
keep going. There are many religions who also condemn oral sex. All right. In fact, there's many religions that condemn sex for any other purpose other than having a child.
Yeah. So pleasure, sexual pleasure.
Sexual pleasure
No,
itself.
that's not
But
really-
let's leave that out for a moment. I think most of us have. Yep. Joy, thank you.
And that's one, like the religions, is like denied sex, like... I don't know.
Yes, having this viewpoint that holy means to be totally without sex, which
What is that called? Celibate.
Celibacy. See,
Can't spell.
Mary's almost as bad as me now.
Oh, I'm serious.
She's getting worse.
I told you I'd take on all of your traits.
My terrible influences for spelling is getting onto her.
Like kind of dirty sex, like sex while menstruation.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
What would you call that?
Sex and menstruation, I'm
yeah.
going to call it.
Then you have then you have things like weeing on people, which is more like a degradation type of.
Yeah.
So
Sort of, does that
sexual
fit in
degradation?
bondage? Yeah.
Yeah. Any others you can think of? It's amazing how many things we've come up.
What was Karen had
What
one?
was Karen going to say?
Homosexuality.
Homosexuality, yeah, even that is considered.
And can we put bisexuality as well?
I don't know if it sort of means
It's
the
not
same
really.
thing, but
I don't know if it's an injury, but bisexuality.
yes, let's put bisexuality, because there is a feeling that homosexuality on the planet is an injured state, but the reality...
It's a taboo,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
In some
By the way, we're not saying all of these are injured states. What we're saying is we want to just, write down all of those things, so maybe we should include homosexuality.
yeah.
Because we're not saying they're all injured states. What we're saying is, because some of them are and some of them aren't, what we're saying is we have all of these different belief systems about them. Yep. Voyeurism, yes, that's good. V-O-E-U.
V-O-Y-U-E-E.
EU. Yeah. Well, yeah, I suppose you could say
Promiscuity, maybe?
consecutive monogamy. Most of us have done that, I think.
Serial monogamy.
Serial monogamy.
Promiscuity, yeah.
Promiscuity, yeah, where you've got more than one thing going at the same time.
Sex with plants?
Sex with plants. Is that a possibility?
I don't know.
I
heard a guy, he shared a story that he not scratched a hole into a tree and put a bit meat in it and then did it.
Fair enough.
Wow.
So,
inanimate objects.
so let's call it inanimate objects, like use of inanimate objects.
Yeah, actually.
And should we include in that things like vibrators, blow-up dolls, all those kind of things, shall we?
Inanimate.
I-N-A-N-I-M-A-T. Sorry, what was that one? Fruits and vegetables. Okay. Use of inanimate objects, yeah.
Okay.
Asphyxiation, yes.
Yes, that's common, isn't it? Now, all these words, how do you spell it?
How do you spell asphyxiation? Go on. A-S-P-H.
Y-X-E-ation. It's
Where somebody...
said to heighten your sexual pleasure when you
constrict your flow...
don't have oxygen to your brain.
Oxygen.
Yep.
Yep.
Oral sex got that.
We've almost
Karen.
covered most, I think, haven't we? No, we haven't exhausted the list.
Karen had one. Was that one? Pornography.
Pornography,
Yeah.
very good.
Very
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Drugs, yeah, so drugs with sex, yeah. We could put that in there somewhere.
Alcohol use. Are we going to go through all of these, babe?
We're not going to get to go through all of these, obviously. Any more you can think of while we're at it?
Sexual rituals?
Rituals, yes, sexual rituals. Yep.
Exhibitionism?
Exhibitionism. And what's the other? So that's very similar. Yeah, let's, sex with dead people. I probably should have written that as a...
Yeah, necrophilia.
So exhibitionism. We're doing pretty good. I'm starting to worry about all of you.
I know. Mutilation of the sexual organs of young children.
Yeah, I
babies.
don't know if I'd include that as a sexual... to me, that's just
Child abuse.
Violent abuse, yeah, just general abuse. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just tired.
Okay, well, that's a good enough list to start with, isn't it? Now, every one of these things has an emotional cause most of which are not connected with sex itself. Now, some of these things are pure. For example, homosexuality. There can be pure homosexuality in the sense that, remember we said, when healed, sexual attraction was only for your soulmate. And if your soulmate happens to be of the same gender that you are, then of course that means it's a homosexual relationship. So homosexuality could be a pure thing, could it not? Right? So some of those things are pure. Some of them are actually like quite negative towards yourself in the sense of they have quite a lot of different unloving emotions involved with different things. And what we need to do is we need to examine these things with a lot more clarity. Now, let's firstly deal with masturbation, because it's one of the easiest to deal with. There's a lot of sexual to-do about masturbation, a lot of jokes about it and so forth, isn't there? You know, if a person's caught masturbating, they're usually made to feel quite terrible about themselves and so forth. But the reality is quite simple. If you can't and are not allowed to touch yourself sexually, then why is anybody else allowed to touch you sexually? So to me, the whole reason why masturbation is treated as a taboo is because there is a general shame that people have about touching themselves sexually and getting pleasure from their own touch. Right? So there's a general shame present. But what happens though with masturbation is you could say sometimes masturbation is taken to the extreme.
So an addiction to masturbation.
So in other words, it becomes an addiction. Do you follow me? So a person may masturbate on a fairly regular basis, but then it may become an extreme. Now, of course, different psychologists will tell you different things about what the extreme is, you know. But in the end, much masturbation begins from a very, very simple emotion. It's a feeling of sadness about not being loved. Just simple emotion that we're just trying to avoid by having a sexual feeling instead. And in fact, the interesting things about most of the things that were written here, not all of them, but most of them, is they all come from some kind of emotional hurt or injury as to why we have that particular desire.
So masturbation is, many people are made to feel like they're very shameful and there's something wrong with them sexually, when in fact the core reason that a person may masturbate compulsively is simply about a sense of like avoiding their own loneliness and sadness.
Now the same thing applies to pornography. A lot of times pornography is actually about a person's sadness. This is why more men are involved in pornography than women generally. It's because more men carry a lot of sexual sadness than women do. Because men want to have sex more generally because they have less blockages to sex because of the multi-generational reasons. Multi-generational reasons of a blockage to sex, remember we talked about earlier with women, were things like how they've been abused, how they've been harmed, how sex has been used as a tool to hurt them, violence towards them as a gender and so forth, which causes blockages to sex. And then a lot of men feel the sadness that their partner or women around them are blocked to sex. And because of this sadness, they then look for a means to look at women who are not blocked to sex. Right? Unfortunately, many of those women are in a rage about sex, but that's a different thing. But they're less blocked to sex, and so pornography becomes a tool to use in order to feel excited sexually. Let's look at oral sex. What would most of the taboos about oral sex be involved about, do you think?
It's not for procreation.
It's not for procreation, so should be wrong then, according to many religious movements. Can you see that a lot of oral sex, or the issues with oral sex, are going to be about bodily functions and actually not loving the genitalia, not loving genitals, but actually feeling an aversion to the genitals, to the smell, taste, and so forth of those functions too. So oral sex, we should say oral sex, I don't feel oral sex or masturbation is an injured thing unless there are certain things happening along with them. They're not injures, they're just things that are taboos. So we remember here, we probably should change that heading. We weren't listing injuries here, we were listing taboos, right? Yeah. And these are all the taboos. Yeah, that's better. But why would a person feel that oral sex is a taboo? Can you feel about what that would be emotionally? Katerina, if you would just wait for the mic.
Because certain things go in certain places, like they're made, like the penis is made for the vagina. You mean penis should go in the vagina,
exactly,
and
nothing else?
Yeah.
Okay, which is also a reason why anal sex is a taboo then.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, let's look at oral sex, for example. Firstly, how is a woman's body made?
That's a fairly broad question.
In terms of sexually, if all pleasure of a woman's body happened internally, right, then it would make sense that sex is just about the penis going in the vagina. But the reality for women is that a lot of their pleasure doesn't happen just internally, does it? So you've got the clitoris as well, external to the body. So then, does it make sense even from God's perspective that sex is penis in vagina? If a person has a sexual organ that's on the outside of their body and not on the inside, then how does the justification occur that it all has to happen inside? Obviously, there is no justification even from that perspective. So can you see how a lot of times we accept a sexual norm and then feel bad about or feel it's a taboo? We accept things just because of belief structures that aren't even grounded in any logic, are they? Like, for example, the belief structure about masturbation, is it grounded in any logic? No. If you can't touch yourself, then who else should be able to touch it? Nobody. And if you can't touch yourself, then basically, and nobody else is allowed to touch you, then why was the sexual organ given to you in the first place by God? It makes no sense, does it? The same applies with things like oral sex. Like, you know, if sex is just going to happen inside your body and not outside of your body, then and why would you have a sexual organ that responds to touch or to somebody's licking or something like that outside of your body? Doesn't make any sense, does it? Logically, it doesn't make any sense. Celibacy is an interesting one for the same reason, isn't it? How can celibacy be holy when God, who created your body, created your sexual organs? Does that make any sense? It doesn't make any sense. So can you see that many of these things don't make sense as taboos? Then others, you can see why they have taboos associated with them. But some of them, you can't even really see why there are any taboo associated with them.
Could we talk maybe, babe, about the specific emotions that might lead us to be attracted to these things that are not really related to sex? So some of these aversions to these things are related to shame about our sexual organs that have been imposed upon us. But
well, let's look at even celibacy from that perspective. Why would I be attracted to celibacy? What emotions would cause me to be attracted to celibacy as a way of life? Let's use the microphones. You can go first.
Denial. It feels like denial.
Denial? Denial of what?
Of my feelings, denial of myself, denial of my urges.
Denial of sexual desire.
Yes.
So shame might cause me to deny my sexual desire?
Yeah.
What else might
What
cause
else
me?
might?
just uncomfortable with it that makes me want to not deal with it at all and focus on being holy. And
Right, so not wanting to deal with any sexual desires.
because I don't want to be sinful.
You don't want to be
Sinful.
sinful.
Okay, a definition of sinfulness, yes. I have a big inside of me a definition of what's sinful, what isn't, and as a result of that, feel that celibacy is my course of action. Anything else?
I can think that
I can think of quite a lot more, actually.
a fear of emotional intimacy.
Fear of emotional intimacy, big one, or fear of sexual intimacy, two big ones, yes. Any more?
Being disillusioned with
Being
sex? Being disillusioned.
Disillusioned with relationships? Yes, yep, very good. And therefore having a lot of grief about relationships, yep.
Feeling inadequate sexually, so wanting to just shut down.
Yes,
completely.
feeling that you're not sexually powerful and therefore you'd rather have no sex at all and then call that a place that's holy. Yeah. And no?
A belief in purifying through punishment and
Yes.
self-punishment.
The way I become holy is by sacrificing myself, by sacrificing some of my desires. Enter?
Fear of being rejected.
Yes, fear of being rejected, definitely with celibacy. Keep going, there's some more. Why do you think the priesthood created celibacy?
I was going to say something else.
Go and say something else.
So within having sex, you are without protection.
Right,
And
so
then you're exposed to whatever judgment and to harm.
So it's a desire for control?
Sorry?
A desire for control?
No. The other way around. When I'm exposed to the possibility or the opportunity of being harmed.
Yes.
Via a judgment. And I'm naked in that moment. And when I'm naked, I have no protection. And when the other one is going, I'm not protected against any
Which
judgment.
is a desire to control.
To control, if I become celibate,
I'm now controlling all of my
the possibility of
interactions.
being harmed.
There's no possibility.
Sorry, I'm not that
It's
fit.
okay, it's okay.
I can't follow right now.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. The question I asked just earlier was,
So,
why did the priesthood create celibacy for themselves? Why did they do that? There's an emotional reason. Nico?
To keep the men pure from women?
Yes.
Because women are lower than men?
So a fear of women.
Yeah.
Is one, so a fear of the opposite gender.
Yes.
Is a major reason for celibacy. A fear of the opposite gender having control of you. Yeah? Yeah? That's quite a few emotional injuries in one particular thing, isn't it? Can you see that? Just all these different emotions that actually generate a particular course of action. All right. Let's choose another one, shall I?
let's choose something particularly, for example, S&M and bondage.
Okay, let's choose that. S&M and bondage.
What might
cause us to want to be involved in practices where pain is involved to heighten sexual desire, in other words? So in other words, sexual desire is heightened while I'm in pain. Igor.
Maybe being punished in childhood?
Yes, being punished by the opposite gender parent
Yes.
certainly can create that.
So why does that create a sexual...
Well, when I'm punished by the opposite gender parent and feel that that's love, now I've got some... I'm going to have some issues about what surrounds love and sex as a result. Yeah.
Or if someone is in a state of numbness.
And only pain
like,
opens
yeah, exactly.
their...
They need a very intense physical experiences to feel something.
To feel something, yes.
Maybe.
Very good. Yep. Why would they be in a state of numbers sexually, aside from what would be the underlying emotional reason for that?
I believe fear or being harmed or anger.
Yeah, or what about even a desire to associate violence with sex,
Yeah.
right? Rather than associate loving kindness with sex.
Right.
Right? In other words, kindness turns them off.
Yeah.
Why would kindness turn you off? Don't it? Sorry.
When you've been treated really unlovingly as a child, and perhaps had sexual injury through an adult or, you know, a powerful person in your life.
Certainly. Now, we're not saying, what we're saying here is this is not an exhaustive list of the injuries associated with one of these particular things. That it is just an example of some of the injuries associated with a certain practice. Does that make sense? So this is about being open enough to investigate these things.
And very often it is about a sadness or a pain that has occurred in our childhood that was not in a sexual context. But because we carry that and associate that with love or intimacy or closeness, then what appears to be a huge sexual injury is created when really the thing to heal is a pain within childhood. Yeah.
Can I give an example of this? Let's say a man is attracted to S&M. In other words, he's attracted to a woman punishing him and he gets sexually turned on as a result, right? And so he's attracted to a woman doing that. Now, can you see there can be an underlying emotional injury where his mother has already punished him or rejected him, and so he feels an association between the rejection and that opens him up sexually. So when he's being rejected, he opens up sexually. When he's not being rejected, he closes down sexually. Remember I said that all the sexual feelings, and this is something to remember right from the beginning of our discussion, that they are within us, passing through us. And it happens through the opening of the particular chakra. Remember, we talked about that. So imagine if the man was only then attracted to a woman who was punishing and rejecting. So as long as the woman is rejecting him, he feels sexually attracted, right? And if she's rejecting him during the sex act, he even feels more excited then, right? But as soon as she stops rejecting him in the sex act, in other words, having some form of physical pain or punishment associated with it, now this energy is not passing through him anymore, so he's now blocked. He's now blocked sexually, and he feels like he needs the S&M practice in order to open up sexually again. Yeah? Dionysus?
I think you've said it, but I want to state also that I think that if there is no emotional association between a certain type of behavior from the mother or from the parent generally, so probably the person won't trade off some emotions to flow. I don't know if I say it correctly.
So you're saying that if emotions were denied during the child's development...
If a child is being abused...
Yes.
All right, and thinks that that's the way that mommy or daddy loves me.
Yes.
There's no association about joyful behavior towards the child.
Yeah.
So it associates love, sex, with abusive behavior.
Yes.
So it can trade off its emotions with that kind of behavior towards him or from him or her towards others.
So it feels sexually turned on by that kind of behaviour rather than any other form, because the injury is that when that kind of behaviour is given to me, then I feel open emotionally.
And the numbness that Nicole said earlier comes from when I have like a good behavior towards me, that doesn't turns me on, or that sets me down actually, so I become numb. But when someone shouts or behaves bad at me, or I behave bad at someone, so that turns,
feel more emotionally connected. Yeah. Can you also, what about on the giving side? So we talked a lot about the receiving side of the S&M, but what about the giving? There's somebody doing the whipping and there's somebody doing, what are they feeling? What's their emotions do you feel that they're in denial of?
I think with sadism it's a revenge for things happened to them before.
Yes, a feeling of revenge is one of the emotions, yes, towards the gender that it's aimed towards.
And so what's just What's under that feeling of
Under
revenge?
the feeling of revenge?
Yeah.
Could be that their opposite gender parent has treated them badly or treated their mother badly, treated the same gender as themselves badly, and so they then feel like they want some kind of... they only feel powerful sexually when they're connected with this feeling of a revengeful act towards the opposite gender.
So in order to heal that, that person would need to connect to deep feelings of powerlessness and grief.
Yeah. So see, remember that many of these actions that we view as taboos are actually based around addictions. They are actually addictions so that we open sexually. And sexual addictions are very powerful because they are sexual in nature, and sex is a very strong feeling inside of our body. And so what happens is we finish up engaging in the addiction that opens us up sexually without dealing with the emotion that shut us down sexually. Does that make sense? So instead, what we're going for there is the addiction that opens us sexually in order to avoid the emotion that shut us down. So in the case if I've been treated badly by the opposite gender parent, I then might feel a degree of rage and anger about that. When I can begin to express that rage and anger towards the opposite gender or feel a feeling of control towards the opposite gender, now that's my addiction being met. Now I open up sexually as a result of that addiction being met. But if the opposite gender did the same to me, I would be even more enraged and therefore close down, maybe even close down myself even further as a result, you know. So this is where usually you find with S&M type practices, one person, it's very rare to have one person who engages in both the overt and the, submissive behaviour rather than the dominating behaviour. So usually one person will either engage in the dominating behaviour and not the submissive, or vice versa, engage in the submissive behaviour but never the dominating behaviour. And the reason why is because of two completely separate injuries based upon interactions with their parents. Nico?
You just said it. It's all about control.
Because
the dominatrix feels she has control over the dominant, so...
Yeah. So it's about sexual control, isn't it? Over
safety. Safety. I'm not afraid of you.
Yes,
I can
safety.
control you.
Yep.
That's it.
I'm safe, you're not. You know, that kind of feeling is there as well. Yes? Anything else you can think of on the dominating side? Can you see how it's working through, like, it's not, I wouldn't call it working through the emotion, it's living in the unhealed state, but needing the unhealed state to open yourself up sexually that causes the attraction to different practices. The key is to not condemn the practice. You see, by making them a taboo, we condemn the practice. When we condemn the practice, or when people generally condemn the practice, we now stop the openness to actually addressing the emotional injuries that create a practice that's unloving.
Yeah, perhaps I would like to say to not condemn the desire. Some of the practices I feel are very harmful and I would never condone the practice, but to not condemn the desire is a very important thing, because unless you're willing to examine the desire, you can't heal it. Yeah.
So the key is to not condemn.
I just spoke a few of them out here.
The desire. But you don't have to act upon the desire.
Exactly.
Right? What we need to do instead is feel the underlying emotion that creates the desire. That's what we need to do.
Because if we keep in mind that the pure state is sex with my soulmate.
In whatever form that may take. But obviously, even if that takes an SMN type form, then obviously there are still emotions to deal with. Because one is dominating and one is submissive. And does that sound like to you like a healed sexual relationship? No, it's not. So it's not yet healed. We don't condemn the fact that it's like that. What we do is we go through the process of working through the emotions to heal it. That's what we do instead. If we want to be at one with God, that's what we do. If we want to be at one with God, we will always look at the practice, whatever the practices are, and we'll examine them completely from a position of love. So we'll ask ourselves, well, is it right for me if I'm addicted to dominating Mary sexually and whipping her, and I'm addicted to that, and I can't even connect with any orgasmic feelings within myself unless those particular things are happening to Mary? If that's the case, then is that loving for myself or Mary? Surely not. Surely I should be able to connect to feelings, sexual feelings, and my own orgasm when we're in a loving exchange without me or her dominating the exchange. So we need to question ourselves rather than justify the behaviour. See, what most people on the planet do with all of these taboos is we become what I would call rebellious about them. Do you know what I mean by that? We basically say, well, yes, I am involved with S&M, and it's okay for me to be involved in S&M, and I'm not actually saying it's not okay, because at the end of the day, you know, you have free will and you can do anything you like. Even if it is damaging to another person, you can still do it. I'm not saying that you haven't got free will, but what I'm saying is that we do need, if we want to be ever at one with God and ever at one with our soulmate, we do need to address the unbalanced desires that are out of harmony with love in the process. Igor, thanks. There's a lot of spirits at the moment projecting at the group about, can we really say these things?
Yeah, there's a lot of like, whoa, they're really talking about that.
You know, can we really say that S&M is bad, for example? And I'm not saying it's bad or good, because to me that's a judgment. What I'm saying is there are emotional injuries involved in the S&M practices. And if we're willing and open, we can see those emotional injuries and address them. We don't need to condemn them. We need to address them. Right? We don't need to judge them. We need to address them. That's what I'm saying. Igor.
I think you just answered the question.
Yeah.
I just wanted to probably use another whiteboard and list at one with God sexual practices. How the good ones, because we...
At one with God sexual practices. Okay. The problem with doing that is that it then seems like a whole heap of rules about what are the proper sexual practices. My suggestion, instead of doing that, is to start questioning whether love is involved in any sexual interaction. You see, a soulmate couple that has unhealed emotions can certainly still engage in unhealed sexual practices. So you can be in a relationship with your soulmate and still have sexual practices that need to be healed. Do you follow me? And the key is to allow yourself to feel the lack of love in these things. Now, if you have a desire for God, you will always eventually progress towards God, and anything that causes you to stagnate in your progress towards God obviously needs to be healed. And sexual practices can certainly cause your stagnation in your progression towards God. This is why some of the people who believe holiness and celibacy are coexisting, is because many of the times they got to a certain point where their sexual practices were not harmonious with getting closer to God, and so they threw away all sexual practices. And they got a bit closer to God because they dealt with some emotions in that process, but unfortunately they can't ever be at one with God in that pace. So while you're practicing celibacy, for example, this is going to be a very strong statement for many of our spirit friends, you will never be at one with God practicing celibacy. Except under one condition. And that is if it's impossible for you to have sexual interaction with your soulmate. But you still wouldn't be practicing celibacy as a practice. You'd still have a desire for your soulmate, right? So and the reality is you'll never be at one with God by forcing yourself into a state of celibacy. Right? So celibacy is stopping you at one with God as much as S&M bondage practices will stop you at one with God. The reason why these stop you at one with God is because there is a domination over somebody else who's submissive. Now, obviously, that's not an act of love. To dominate and be submissive, both conditions are not an act of love. You know, we would join together equally when we're in an act of love. So an S&M practice, while we may be engaged in it, it's up to you whether you engage in it, but at the end of the day, it will prevent your at one with God as much as a practice of celibacy will. That's the irony, right?
Is it as much as?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is. At one point, sooner or later, if I continue practicing celibacy, at one point I'm going to stagnate in my condition, and from that moment on, I am never going to become at one with God. Right? Now, that condition might be a bit higher than when I practice S&M bondage, but at the end of the day, they're still stagnant conditions. So they're just as bad as each other, preventing us from becoming at one with God, aren't they? If we're looking at our desire to become at one with God and at one with our soulmate, both practices will never allow us to become at one with God or at one with our soulmate. Both of them. Now, the earth has no judgment of holiness towards celibacy. In fact, they laud celibacy as holy. And yet when it comes to S&M bondage, they condemn that. And yet what I'm saying is both practices will inhibit your desire and longing to become at one with your soulmate and at one with God. Both practices.
Because they're both denial of emotion.
They're both denial of different emotions, and they're both denial of actual, the pure state, which is that state. Anything that denies that pure state is going to inhibit your at one with your soulmate and at one with God. Does that make sense to everyone? So this is what we need to consider, is that some of these things we condemn that, and yet celibacy we often just skip over, and yet the two practices from God's perspective will have just as much impact upon our becoming at one with God as each other.
I keep getting stuck on that point because I feel that S&M, I'm actively involved in harming another person, whereas celibacy, I'm harming my own sexual desire.
So what's the difference? Harming another person or harming yourself?
Okay.
Celibacy is harming your soulmate. Celibacy is also harming yourself.
Sure.
Both are harming in each case. So the reality is that both practices will stop you from becoming at one with God. Both practices will stop you from becoming at one with your soulmate. So both practices are just as stagnant as each other. They stagnate your progression just as much as each practice. So in the spirit world at the moment, in the sixth dimension, there are still many millions of spirits who believe totally in celibacy. That is the only way to connect to God. And what I'm saying to those spirits is, no, I'm sorry, but you are just as much in denial of God and your soulmate in that state as a person who practices bondage would be. That's what I'm saying. Is that pretty confronting or what? If we can come